This story begins on the 4th of July, the day of hope, independence, and promise in America. This story ends with a scrap of paper and 5 penciled words, "Dear hearts and gentle people." It is the story of Stephen Foster, his life and his music. It is July the 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. We're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Celebrations for the golden anniversary of the United States of America are going on in the streets on the west side of the Allegheny River. Hooray and hurrah and cannons and crowds and cheers. And in a hilltop cottage 2 miles distant, but within earshot of the noisy celebrations, Eliza Foster welcomes her 9th baby. 12:30, July the 4th, Stephen Collins Foster is born. Looking back now at Stephen's childhood and boyhood, you try to fit the pieces together and discover what it was that led him to become America's troubadour. Learning and school days? You read from the same primer that Stevie had, and you get a clue, for he learned his alphabet by repeating these jingles. A, in Adam's fall we sinned all. B, C, D, and so on all the way up to Z. Z, Zacchaeus, he did climb the tree his blessed Lord to see. The jingles and the rhymes, they may have helped. And as Stephen graduates from grade to grade, you learn that he's a good student, studies well. Now it is 1847. Stephen Foster is 21 years old. The sewing machine has just been invented. The first 5 and 10-cent postage stamps with the portraits of Benjamin Franklin and George Washington go on sale. And the war with Mexico over Texas has come to an end. In Pittsburgh on Wood Street, Andrew's Eagle Ice Cream Saloon is doing a land office business in cakes, confections, and ices. Andrew's is not just an ordinary ice cream parlor. You can see a real show there. Admission is free, except for a 10-cent ticket which you can use to buy something to eat. You sit at small tables, and on the stage in front of you is a piano, singers, and entertainers.
Oh, the world is sad and dreary everywhere I roam. Oh, darkies, how my heart grows weary, far from the old folks at home.
All of this would be hardly worth remembering, except for the fact that on the 11th of September, 1847, a group of vocalists at Andrew's Ice Cream Saloon sing a song written by Stephen Foster, a new song never before given to the public. Oh, Susanna.
I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. I'm going to Louisiana, my true love for to see. It rained all night the day I left, the weather it was dry. The sun so hot I froze to death, Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, oh, don't you cry for me. I've come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee.
3 months later, January 1848, gold is discovered in California at Sutter's Sawmill. Thousands speed to the Gold Coast with picks, shovels, dishpans, and skillets. The gold rush is on. Stephen Foster's "Oh, Susanna" becomes the theme song of the 49ers. This is how they sing it.
Oh, California, that's the land for me. I'm bound for Sacramento with a washboard on my knee.
It's a wonderful song, so catchy that all America is singing "Oh, Susanna" before they even realize it. The tune travels far and wide. It's sung in Mexico.
Oh, Susana, no llores, por favor, pues ya vengo de Alabama con mi bajo, mi primor.
In Germany,
Oh, Susanna, oh, weine nicht um mich. Ich kam von Alabama mit mein Banjo auf dem Knie.
in France,
Oui, j'arrive d'Alabama, mon banjo sur les genoux. Et je vais en Louisiane pour voir ma grosse nounou. Le soleil était si chaud que j'étais gelé jusqu'aux os. Il pleuvait à grand fracas, Suzanne, ne pleure pas.
and in sunny Italy.
Oh, Susanna, oh, non piangere per me. Son venuto dall'Alabama con la mia chitarra al braccio.
And even the Greeks have words for it.
Reo, Susanna, mina klesesi, ergma papina Alabama, me mandolino stikni mire.
Although the fame of "Oh, Susanna" spreads from Indiana to India, the name of the composer is almost unknown. Because Stephen Foster sells his songs to the minstrels who sing them, their names appear on the sheet music. However, the next year, Foster does come in for mention in a local newspaper. It's a very short paragraph. It begins, "Married in Pittsburgh on Monday evening, the 22nd, by Reverend T.H. Lyman, Stephen C. Foster, and Jane D. McDowell, daughter of the late Dr. A.N. McDowell." Dr. Andrew McDowell, Jane's father, was a well-known physician who once had even taken care of the famous novelist Charles Dickens. And also in the McDowell household is an elderly Negro called Joe. He's been with the family for years. Old Joe has watched Stephen and Jane through their courtship. He was always ready to please, always full of smiles and good humor. "Someday I'm going to put you in a song," Stephen told old Joe, and one day he did.
Gone are the days when my heart was young and gay. Gone are my friends from the cotton fields away. Gone from the earth to a better land I know. I hear the gentle voices calling, "Old Black Joe."
Old Joe wasn't the first of Stephen's inspirations, nor the last. Perhaps the composer was most inspired by his wife, Jane, to whom he wrote 5 songs. Best loved and best remembered of them all is the tender love song,
I dream of Jeannie with the light brown hair, born like a vapor on the summer air. I see her tripping where the bright streams play, happy as the daisies that dance on her way. Many were the wild notes her merry voice would pour, many were the blithe birds that warble them o'er. I dream of Jeannie with the light brown hair, floating like a vapor on the soft summer air.
Yes, his songs are inspired by those he loves, but also by the places Stephen Foster remembers. In Bardstown, Kentucky, stands an old southern mansion called Federal Hill. There's a legend that Stephen Foster was once a guest in this house, built in Revolutionary days. An unforgettable place, standing well back of a beautiful lawn, the summer air scented with the perfume of many flowers, the driveway lined with tulip trees and maples, a southern plantation of such beauty that it isn't hard to imagine that a young composer from the north might have written a song about it.
We will sing one song for the old Kentucky home, for the old Kentucky home, far away.
We will sing one song for the old Kentucky home, for the old Kentucky home far away. Home. That's where Stephen's heart was, and that's the theme of so many of Stephen Foster's songs. Perhaps the best known of all is The Old Folks at Home. Most folks remember it by its opening line, "Way down upon the Swanee River." Stephen completes this song when he's 25 years old. That is, he almost completes it. There's just one word missing. So he visits his brother Morrison for advice. "What's a good name of 2 syllables for a southern river?" Stephen asks. "I want to use it in a new song, but all I can think of is the Petey River." Brother Morrison suggests Yazoo. But way down upon the Yazoo River doesn't seem right to Stephen. They both open a map of the United States and in a few minutes find just the right name, that of a little river in Florida which empties into the Gulf of Mexico, the Swanee River.
Way down upon the Swanee River, far, far away, there's where my heart is turning ever, there's where the old folks stay. All up and down the whole creation, sadly I roam, still longing for the old plantation and for the old folks at home. All the world and sad and dreary, everywhere I roam. Oh, darkies, how my heart grows weary, far from the old folks at home.
You know how often people say, an artist is rarely appreciated in his own time? But in Stephen Foster's case, it was different. A look into a journal written over 100 years ago proves it. Old Folks at Home, it says, is on everybody's tongue. Pianos and guitars groan with it night and day. Sentimental young ladies sing it. Sentimental young gentlemen warble it in midnight serenades. Young bucks hum it. Boatmen roar it. All the bands play it. Amateur flute blowers agonize over it. Street organs grind it out. Stars carol it on the theatrical boards. The chambermaid sweeps and dusts to the measured cadence of Old Folks at Home. The butcher's boy treats you to a strain or two as he hands in the steaks for dinner. The milkman, and on and on. Popular isn't the word for it. But the irony of it is that this song, Foster's most famous one, didn't even have his name on the music.
To Camptown ladies sing this song, doo-da, doo-da. To Camptown racetrack 5 miles long, oh, doo-da day. I come down there with my head caved in, doo-da, doo-da. I go back home with a pocket full of tin, oh, doo-da day. Trying to run all night, trying to run all day. I bet my money on the bobtail nag, somebody bet on the bay.
Camptown Races is also the kind of a song that everyone sings, not knowing who wrote it and, what's more, not caring. It was like most of Stephen's music, remembered as folk songs, the music more important than the composer.
The long-tailed fly and the big black horse, doo-da, doo-da. They fly the track and they both cut across, oh, doo-da day. The blind horse sticking in a big mud hole, doo-da, doo-da. Can't touch bottom with a 10-foot pole, oh, doo-da day. Trying to run all night, trying to run all day. I bet my money on the bobtail nag, somebody bet on the bay.
Why don't you join in and sing Camptown Races? It is 1852. Foster is 26. People are reading The House of Seven Gables and Moby Dick, and another book just published, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Americans, thousands of them, are paying 25 cents a copy for the music to Stephen Foster's latest melody, a song that wasn't easy for him to write, a song which he rewrote and rewrote many times. Masses in the Cold, Cold Ground.
Where the ivy am a-creeping o'er the grassy mound, there, oh, massa, am a-sleeping, sleeping in the cold, cold ground. Down in the cornfield, hear that mournful sound. All the dark years am a-weeping, masses in the cold, cold ground.
Masses in the Cold, Cold Ground sold 74,000. My Old Kentucky Home, 90,000. And Old Folks at Home, more than 130,000 copies.
Come where my love lies dreaming, dreaming the happy hours away, in visions bright redeeming the fleeting joys of day, dreaming the happy hours, dreaming the happy hours away. Come where my love lies dreaming, is sweetly dreaming the happy hours away.
Beautiful Dreamer is supposed to be his last composition. It proves that Stephen Foster was still the master of song.
Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee. Sounds of the rude world heard in the day, lulled by the moonlight, have all passed away. Beautiful dreamer, queen of my song, list while I woo thee with soft melody. Gone are the cares of life's busy throng. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me. Beautiful dreamer, awake unto me.
Our story is almost over. It has traveled over many years, many miles, hardships and troubles. But the music you have heard takes but one direction. It is all homeward bound. For Stephen Foster loved the home and the family so very much that he couldn't help repeating his love again and again in his songs. When you hear Stephen Foster's songs next time, remember they're really the biography of a composer, the echo of a man. If you understand his music, you can't help understanding Stephen Foster. Stephen Foster passed away on January 13, 1864, in a ward in Bellevue Hospital, New York. Besides the many immortal songs he bequeaths the world, in a little purse containing 38 cents, he has left us a scrap of paper on which is written, "Dear hearts and gentle people." And so Stephen Foster dies, carrying with him that unborn song. In Pittsburgh, at the funeral, the Citizens Brass Band plays two songs, "Come Where My Love Lies Dreaming" and "Old Folks at Home."
all our patriotic tunes, there is one that seems to have captured the hearts of America more than any other. And that's, of course, John Philip Sousa's thrilling march, The Stars and Stripes Forever. You have heard it whenever there's been a parade down the main street in your town. Or maybe you've marched to its strains on your way to assembly in school. Certainly you've heard it dozens of times on your radio and TV. The Stars and Stripes Forever symbolizes our nation in music, just as much as the flag after which it's named. And quite appropriately, the man who composed it was born in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. John Philip Sousa was one of 10 children, born to a German mother and a Spanish father on November the 6th, 1854. Since most of his family wasn't especially musical, John Philip never heard much music at home. His father, however, did play the trombone, indeed well enough to be a member of the United States Marine Band. John Philip loved to listen often to the band music coming from the nearby barracks. This delighted his father, so much so that he decided to enroll his young son in a music school. John Philip made fine progress, particularly on the violin. In fact, when he was only 11, he organized a group of unemployed musicians, all older than himself, to play at dance halls and dancing schools. This turned out to be a very successful venture for a while. Soon after that, John Philip received an offer from the band leader of a circus. This, of course, was a pretty hard thing for a boy to turn down, and he made plans to run away. John Philip's father, however, got wind of the offer. Very early the next morning, he paid a visit to the Marine Barracks, just 2 blocks away, had a talk with the commandant, and before the morning was over, John Philip was accepted by the Marine Band as an apprentice. Needless to say, the circus offer was soon forgotten, and the next 8 years were quite happy for John Philip. But inevitably, John Philip became restless, just being an apprentice, and since he was often in the position of having to turn down more exciting musical jobs, he decided to ask for an honorable discharge. A variety of musical experiences were in store for him, and one very memorable one was playing first violin in a large orchestra at the Centennial Festival in Philadelphia back in 1876. The conductor of this orchestra was none other than Jacques Offenbach, the noted French composer of such sparkling works as The Tales of Hoffmann, Orpheus in the Underworld, and La Vie Parisienne. Offenbach came over from Paris especially for the Centennial, and naturally his programs often included selections from his comic operas, such as this one. During the season of 1878-79, John Philip's life was again involved in the world of comic opera. This time, it was Gilbert and Sullivan, whose HMS Pinafore was just making its first appearance over here. Everyone was captivated by Pinafore, and there were many productions to be seen in practically all large cities. John Philip was asked to coach and conduct an amateur production in Philadelphia. This, as it turned out, was to be a most happy experience for him. Not only was the cast an exceptionally gifted one, but he fell deeply in love with one of its members, a beautiful and delightful 16-year-old girl named Jane Bellis. In John Philip Sousa's autobiography, Marching Along, he described her as quite the loveliest little girl I had ever seen. She had a cloud of chestnut hair and a perfect complexion. I liked everything about her, her manner, her speech, her face, her voice. Jane and John Philip were married on New Year's Eve, 1879, and eventually became the parents of 3 children, John Philip Jr., Priscilla, and Helen. Vacationing with his bride on Cape May the following spring, Sousa turned his hand to the composing of an operetta. Like almost everything that he set his mind to doing, the result was very successful. The name of the operetta was Our Flirtations, and following a good run in Philadelphia, a long road tour was arranged, with the composer conducting. By the time he reached St. Louis, he was greeted by a letter from his father urging the March King to come back to Washington at once, this time to accept the job of conductor of the United States Marine Band. Needless to say, another conductor was soon found for Our Flirtations, and Sousa reported for duty with the Marine Band on October 1st, 1880. He found conditions in the band pretty sad. The salaries were shockingly low, the morale even lower, and the repertoire and even uniforms badly in need of being brought up to date. All of this, under Sousa's new regime, was corrected, and the band soon was looking and sounding better than ever. The first function of the band, with Sousa as conductor, was playing at a New Year's Day reception in the White House. In contrast to the loud, blaring sounds made by the band at previous receptions, Sousa decided to keep the music discreetly soft so that conversation among diplomats would not be strained. President Rutherford B. Hayes welcomed this change greatly and let Sousa know of his appreciation. Following Hayes' term of office, James Garfield became the new chief executive, but Sousa scarcely had an opportunity to know him, for only a few months after the inauguration, President Garfield's life was ended by an assassin's bullet. Chester A. Arthur now succeeded to office, but since there was still a period of mourning, the new president did not use the band at first. This gave Sousa a most welcome chance not only to rehearse the band thoroughly, but also to do composing. He wrote tone poems, songs, waltzes, polkas, but inevitably his greatest successes were marches. The first of these to become a hit was The Gladiator. Amazing as it may seem, 17 different bands played it during the course of a single parade in Philadelphia. President Arthur was not overly fond of the traditional air, "Hail to the Chief," which has always been played at official functions to signal the arrival of a president. He told Sousa that he didn't care for the tune, and Sousa completely agreed. "In that case," said the president, "change it," which Sousa promptly did. He wrote a presidential polonaise, and while he was about it, the March King felt that the Marine Corps could also use an official number to be played at outdoor functions. This turned out to be one of the most stirring marches ever written, Semper Fidelis. The more marches Sousa wrote, the more the public wanted. The success of Semper Fidelis prompted organizations of all kinds to request specially composed marches. One of these was a newspaper called the Washington Post, which was sponsoring an essay contest among the pupils in public schools. 20,000 essays were handed in, and the prizes were to be distributed at the grounds of the Smithsonian Institute on June 15, 1889. To make the occasion really festive, the Marine Band was not only called upon to play, but its conductor was also asked to compose a march for an audience of the 20,000 young contestants. This would be a refreshing change from his past assignments, and he was especially happy to oblige. And the especially happy-sounding result was the Washington Post March. The Washington Post March became an instantaneous hit, not only in Washington, but soon throughout the entire country. Everyone was humming it, whistling it, and even dancing to its catchy rhythm. And eventually, the Washington Post March made Sousa a celebrity in the most unlikely parts of the globe. An American officer heard it played on the violin by a native boy in Borneo. A little French peasant girl picked it out on the piano. It was even played in Germany at the dedication of a monument to Richard Wagner. And later, when the Sousas visited Italy, someone told them that the composer of the Washington Post March was one of the most famous Italian composers by the name of Giovanni Filippo Sousa. No one could have been more delighted than Sousa to think that this worldwide favorite had been inspired by the prospect of 20,000 children as his audience. Later, in fact, he dedicated another of his marches to a company of high school cadets in Washington and named it very appropriately the High School Cadets March. When President Benjamin Harrison took office, Sousa approached him with the idea of taking the Marine Band on a national tour. It so happened that the president had been thinking of going on a personal goodwill tour himself. However, on thinking it over, he decided that the sight of colorful uniforms and the thrilling sound of the Marine Band playing Sousa marches might be a good deal more effective. To handle the tour, they selected David Blakely, a wealthy man from Chicago, who at one time had been president of the Minneapolis Philharmonic and knew his way about the concert field. The tour, which lasted 5 weeks, was most successful. Traveling way back in the 90s, though, was often pretty uncomfortable, and the schedule of 8 or 9 concerts a week wore the men out. Sousa himself was completely exhausted when he got back to Washington, and the Navy doctor ordered a long vacation for him, perhaps a European trip. Mrs. Sousa, of course, was delighted with what the doctor ordered, and so off they went to London, to Bayreuth, to Paris, to all the places and the sights that they had read and heard about. all this leisure time, Sousa had a good chance to do some thinking about his career. He realized he was not a very good businessman. In fact, he'd sold several of his most popular marches, such as Semper Fidelis, Washington Post, and High School Cadets, to a Philadelphia music publisher for only $35 apiece outright. It was getting a little irritating to think that he was known from coast to coast as the March King, and yet, as the conductor of the United States Marine Band, his salary was only $1,500 a year. David Blakely, as well, was doing some hard thinking. He was finding it more and more difficult to book the Marine Band because of opposition from local orchestras and bands who felt it was unfair to have to compete with a federal organization. Finally, he proposed to Sousa that he quit the Marine Band and form his own. Further, Blakely proposed to raise Sousa's salary from $1,500 to $6,000 a year, plus 20% of the profits. This was much too good to reject, of course, even though the March King did have certain qualms about resigning a government position. But resign he did. Sousa led the Marine Band for the last time on parade at the White House on July 30th, 1892, with the stirring strains of his Washington Post March. Sousa's band started out famously. Many bookings, many tours were planned. They played at the Trocadero in Chicago, run by the same Ziegfeld who was later to originate the Ziegfeld Follies. They had an engagement at the San Francisco Midwinter Fair, and then there was another engagement at the old Madison Square Garden in New York, with a program made up entirely of Sousa compositions. A series of European tours followed, and even a trip around the world for Sousa and his band in 1910 and 11. It's no wonder that one of his most inspired marches is called Hands Across the Sea. Sousa's first operetta, Our Flirtations, as mentioned earlier, was very popular. But the best remembered of his operetta scores is El Capitan, produced in the spring of 1896 and starring a very famous acting couple, De Wolfe and Edna Wallace Hopper. Several of the best tunes were gathered together by Sousa to make up the El Capitan March. In the fall of 1896, Sousa and his wife were enjoying another European vacation when they were shocked to read of the sudden death of David Blakely, the man who had 4 years before persuaded Sousa to form his own band. They booked passage for New York immediately, and here is what Sousa himself wrote in his autobiography of an incident on that voyage. As the vessel steamed out of the harbor, I was pacing the deck, absorbed in thoughts of my manager's death and the many duties and decisions which awaited me in New York. Suddenly, I began to sense the rhythmic beat of a band playing within my brain. It kept on, ceaselessly, playing, playing, playing. Throughout the whole tense voyage, that imaginary band continued to unfold the same themes, echoing and re-echoing the most distinct melody. I did not transfer a note of that music to paper while I was on the steamer, but when we reached shore, I set down the measures that my brain band had been playing for me, and not a note of it has ever changed. The composition is known the world over as the Stars and Stripes Forever, and is probably my most popular march. So wrote John Philip Sousa in 1928, 4 years before his death. Today, of course, the Stars and Stripes Forever is more popular than ever, certainly America's greatest march. And John Philip Sousa, after all these years, is still our own undisputed March King.